Hi, this is Martin Ledford. I'm here with Bill McCoy. Bill has won our Seniors Bass Club Championship for the past 2 years, 2014, 2015. He's been the Angler of the Year. We're kind of going to go through he's going to go through some stuff that he does in preparation for fishing a tournament, and also tell you a little bit about the baits and stuff that he's used that's made him successful.
I want to thank you, Martin, for having me here today. Guys, what I want to do is kind of walk you through some basic things that I do in preparation to go to a tournament. And I'm going to start with the boat today to give you a little general idea of making sure that nothing happens on the road, obviously running out of any fuel, flat tires, etc. So I'm going to take a moment to just kind of walk you through my boat. This is an old boat. It's a 21-foot Triton. I've had it since 1999. I try to take care of it, and in turn it's taking care of me. And I think it's very important to keep your boat up and stay on top of any type of maintenance. We'll start at the back here and kind of walk you through a process that I go through. Always check for is always to make sure my straps are in place, make sure my motor is well secured, no vibration going down the road. Of course, that'll tear on the transom and all. Another thing I do, a lot of times your bilge pump does not get all the water out of your boat. So on rainy days or where I know I've got a lot of water accumulated at the bottom of the boat, I'll normally take my plug out. But the thing that I do is, and you buy these at Walmart or anywhere, I take this little cone here and put it right here at the floor next to my boat, the back of the boat, as a reminder that I've taken the plug out of the boat. So I'll make sure I put it in prior to departure for the next day. That's very important. I walk to the back side of the boat. I check all my cables down here, my batteries, to make sure they're secure. Make sure that my reserve tank for my oil is at least 3/4 full. You definitely don't want your buzzer coming on. So I always check that, and I keep my oil supply down in the floor here, and I'll fill it up. One of the things that over the years I've noticed is the additional weight that applies to a boat. This particular boat here holds 52 gallons of gas. In a normal tournament, obviously you're not going to burn 52 gallons of gas. So what I try to do is keep about half a tank of gas in here, because a gallon of gas weighs about 6 pounds. And if you start doing the math and everything, you'll see all the extra weight that you're putting on the back of the boat by having it full. So I run about a half a tank of gas in every tournament. Equally as important is what's in your live wells as far as the water is concerned. A gallon of water, I think, is roughly 8 pounds. So if you start thinking about it from a logical standpoint, and you're keeping your live wells full, both of them, then you're adding additional weight onto your boat, which in essence causes a lot of stress on your boat going down the road, and also it affects your fuel mileage on your truck. So to minimize all of that, I try to stay consistent on that. As I walk around, I do some visual checks. I look down at my lug nuts to kind of make sure they're intact. I hadn't lost any of my grease out of my bearings. And then I walk on around a little bit, check on my electronics. And one of the things you'll find out through vibration, either on the water or on the road, is your knobs become loose at times. So I always check my knobs on my electronics to make sure they're secure. And that's very important. I also reach down after I turn my batteries on back there, and I hit my starter to make sure my starter will turn over the next morning, hopefully. As I go on through the boat, I always make sure my net is over here on the right-hand side, because obviously you don't want to forget about your net. So I'll always take my net, secure it inside the boat to make sure it's in the boat prior to departure the next morning. As I walk up towards the front, I basically do the same thing, checking the little knobs here on the Lowrance depth finder, make sure it's secure. I look down, and one of the things we have a tendency to overlook sometimes is our spare tire. I think it's of vital importance to make sure you got at least 40 to 50 pounds in that spare tire at all times, and also to make sure it's secure. So I actually reach down a lot of times to shake the tire, and a lot of times I'll gauge the tire to make sure I got sufficient amount of air in the tire. Okay. One of the things, if you're shallow water fishing like myself, you want to secure or make sure that your transducer here does not hit the rocks and get into a lot of debris, stumps and stuff. So I've actually applied a little block here, this little piece of aluminum here, that blocks anything coming along the lower part of the lake. So what I do is always add, this is a good thing to add this little piece of aluminum here as a blockade for your transducer to eliminate any interference of destroying or tearing up your transducer. The other thing, this is something I just bought this past year, but it works great. It's a little lug nut, for better words, that you take an old nut off there and you secure this by just tightening it on here. What this does, it takes anywhere from 20 to 30% of the vibration out of your trolling motor, and it also cuts through the grass a lot better when you get up shallow. That's a very nice addition. It runs about $35 to $40. One of the things I do is just double check to make sure the trolling motor is down and it's not having slop in it, because you don't want that thing bouncing up and down going down the road, so I double check that. Another thing that I found to be very useful is this little piece of Velcro that you can buy at Walmart, or you can actually buy it at Lowe's. But it's a commercial grade of Velcro. And I've got a piece located down here at the front of the motor to where when I disengage it, I stick it on there to where it stays in place. I don't have to be, reached over the side of the boat to try to find my cable. And then when I get ready to go down the lake, I just come back up here and stick it on right there, and it's always stays in place, so I don't have to be looking for it.
Perfect.
There's no slop. I'd like to talk about a few things that I personally keep in my boat for tournament purposes, and of course pre-fishing also. But these are a couple of colors that I keep in the boat at all times, and let me briefly explain. They're called skippy fish. They come in chartreuse, and obviously this is in orange here. And the reason I keep these in here, that even though I do keep a bottle, I just kind of don't like having anything liquid in the boat because, spilling on your carpet and all. But the unique thing about these particular markers are that once they start to run dry, you can take them to your workbench, take the tops off, stick them down into your containers here, and they will self-fill themselves. A little bit more expensive, but I'm telling you, in the long run, you save a lot of money versus buying this at $4.99 a bottle. So, and these last for an extremely long time. I think I fill these maybe twice the whole year. A lot of people ask me, Bill, when do you know when to use which colors and stuff like that? In the spring of the year, starting in February, it's hard to beat chartreuse on the back of any bait that you use, whether it be a jig or a spinnerbait. It seems to zone in on chartreuse a lot better. In the fall of the year, when the leaves start turning and start coming off the trees and everything, I like to go to the orange because they have a tendency to feed more of a crawfish during that period of time. And so I actually use orange, and I seem like I get a lot more bites. People ask me a lot of times about scent. Do I use scent? I think scent's very important. I think anything that you can do to enhance the smell on any bait you're throwing can only encourage the fish to bite your particular baits and stuff like that. So what I use two different products. I use this Jack's juice is a very good product that I use, but I also use the kind of the paste or the salve that comes in like an orange color that you can buy. You can actually buy it in a lot of different places. I think Dick sells it, but it seems to stay on the bait a little bit longer. So I do use that quite often also. I never leave home without my super glue, and people say, well, what do you use that for all the time? I use it in jig fishing quite a bit, and we'll illustrate that in a little bit later presentation. But it's also good if your skirts are not staying up on your spinnerbait or something to do that. Gerald's got a juice out. It's called the G juice that I put 2 drops in each one of my live wells prior to blast off in a tournament to help my fish survive. So I definitely use that. The other thing that I think is very important, a lot of times you'll be getting bites, you're not getting the hook in or something like that. I always keep a file in my boat to sharpen my hooks. I've seen times that would just run that thing across the hook several times. It has enhanced my bite to where I actually start setting some hooks.
Just demo on a spinnerbait how you do that, Bill.
Let me show you what I do, and there's a lot of different. I've always been taught over the years to take it and always go away from the point. And what I do this in a circular motion. I start with the left-hand side of the bait, and I press pretty hard all the way around until I go all the way around to the right-hand side of the hook. And then when I do this, I go back over it one time, and then what I do very gently, because you're gonna have a little bit of a barb there, very gently taper it off like I said. And obviously the rule of thumb is that when I do that, just take your fingernail, stick it in there. You'll notice how that's pegged in there now. That's not moving at all. Again, plus you can always sort of feel it, how sharp it is. Makes a big difference sometimes when you catch a fish, you don't catch a fish. This little old tool here is a tool that I usually keep several of them in the boat and everything. And this has saved me a tremendous amount of money over the years on jig fishing, spinnerbait fishing, crankbait fishing. Basically, all it is just an old spark plug. What I do is open up the little gap down here, insert a little swivel on there. It's got an opening like this. And when that plug or whatever's down 8 or 10 foot, just stick that on your line, snap it back, drop it. But here's the key when you use a spark plug as release on any kind of plug. Never try to do it at an angle. In other words, you've got to get vertically aligned with the plug that's on the bottom of the lake. What happens, the end of the spark plug comes down and it'll hit up against, I'm going to just use the illustration of the spinnerbait. What it does, it comes down right on top of the lead to where you've hooked it down. But if you hit it at an angle, all it's doing is bouncing off the lead. So what you want to do is come straight down onto the plug. I can get right up over top of it and I shake it like that, and you can actually feel it hitting your plug at a depth. About 90% of the plugs that I get hung up on, that right there has retrieved them. So this is an excellent, excellent retriever for your lures. Vital important is a pair of scissors. Always have a nice pair of scissors. And people say, well, Bill, you got some small scissors. I got, I use, fingernail cutters and stuff like that to cut. This right here is important when you get hung up on the bank somewhere. And sometimes a little small limb or something like that, you take a pair of scissors and cut the limb off to get your plugs back. Saves you a lot of time and effort. It keeps you from losing a lot of plugs by having a long pair of scissors. So I keep those in there. Little device is very important. I keep in the boat. A lot of times, if fish are hitting real hard, especially on a spinnerbait, you'll lose your outside blades. This is very important to keep a few extra blades in your boat to where you can take it, insert it into your O-ring, put your new blade on there and continue fishing. Very difficult sometimes if you don't have this little tool. Very important. A lot of times when fish eat a jig or eat a spinnerbait or a crankbait or something like it, it gets lodged down in his throat. Take a big old pair of needle nose like this, stick down in there, twist it one time to the right, back to your left a little bit, 9 times out of 10, it'll come dislodged. Another tool, very inexpensive tool, you buy at the Bass Pro Shop, Academy. Little old barb on the end, stick it down there to where the hook's at, put the hook into the little latch there, squeeze it, shake it, comes right off. Excuse me. Another tool we overlook sometimes. Nothing more disgusting than to be starting out early in the morning you can't see. Keep your little flashlight, LED light in your boat at all times. It helps you, obviously tie on lures, etc. Very inexpensive tool, worth everything.
That's good.
Tommy, this is for you, early morning light. Guys, I'd like to tell you the way I pretty much control my rods and my reels. I've actually got a board here that you can obviously buy at just about any store. It's an erasable board. But what this does for me, every time I buy a reel, I got a little engraver. And I do 2 things. I put my initials on my reels and I put a number on the reels. And the reason I do that for twofold. The number one, to keep track of my reels when I go fishing with other people. If I happen to leave one in the boat, I can come back to my board here and immediately identify exactly which reel I'm missing. If I knock one over the board, I know exactly which one I'm missing. I think I've got 16 reels here, but what I do, I make basically 4 lines. And let me illustrate. For an example, this reel is reel number 7. So if I go down, well, let's see, let me make sure, number 4, it's a spinnerbait. So So if you'll notice here, I put a 4 down here because it's engraved obviously on the side of my reel. I use it for spinnerbait. I got P15 line on it, and I put it on there, October the 11th. So that way I keep track of when I put my line on there, on what reel, and what's the purpose of that particular reel. And what I do, about every month or two, I go back and summarize. I do a spot check to make sure I got all my reels. And this is the way I control my inventory of what I've got for my rods and reels. The other thing I like to do, I use 2 basic rods, sizes. You know, a lot of guys have got, 7.2, 7.6, 7s, 6.6s, pistol grips, 6.10s. I use two rods. I use a 7-foot exclusive for jig fishing. I use ducket rods primarily. And I got these little old carbon lights that I buy at the Bass Pro Shop. And I think these are 6.10s that I use for spinnerbait. I like an 80-20 rod. When I say an 80-20 rod, I want 80% backbone on spinnerbait and a jig, 20% on the tip up here. Very important. Another thing I do when I buy a rod, first thing I do is get my drill bit out. And I drill a hole in the back side of my trigger here. And the reason I do that, instead of these little old clips that got on the side of the rods that aggravate the crap out of it with these lines getting tangled up in it, I drill a hole, which makes it very convenient when I get ready to put my stuff up. I just reach down here, stick it into the trigger of the rod, and therefore it's out of the way, roll the line up on here, and I'm ready to go. That's just the way I control that part of it. It's very efficient. It keeps my rods pretty much entangled, keep them getting tangled up. But another thing I've noticed, and this is key, when you're buying rods, obviously we got the micro mini eyes out there today. We got obviously larger rod tips and stuff. But one of the problems that I see people having today is people a lot of times are throwing braided line. Braided line and mini eyes do not match up. The wear and tear is enormous, and a lot of people are ruining their rods by using braided line, especially when you get above 30 pounds on micro eyes. So what you want to do is take into consideration what kind of line you're going to be throwing, and to make sure you accommodate that based on the size of the eyes on the rod. And I think you'll get a lot of satisfaction out of that. I use basically P15 on spinnerbait fishing. I get good distance, never been broke off on P15, extremely strong. And I've got a variety of lines I use on jig fishing. A lot of people like fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is an excellent line. However, I never really got in tune with it. I don't like the crackling sound coming through the eyes, so I stay with monofilament. But I do use one line in particular, and that's an Izor line that I buy on the East Coast. Very strong. The way I test line, I've got a unique way that I feel like that makes me comfortable, is I got an 8-pound barbell, and I got a whole variety of lines that I test. And I take a glove, and I put this glove on, and I tie a Palomar knot onto the 8-pound test line, and I do repetitions up and down on a mat until I can break it. I have yet to break 15-pound P line on about 50 repetitions, or the Izor line. Other lines, the backs I've got out between 20 and 30 repetitions without breaking. And I do some hard jerks on it. It'll snap just like that. So I think it's very important to test your line to make sure that you, as the angler, has got the confidence that what you need in order to feel that confidence when you get in the water. Bass fishing, bottom line, is nothing but confidence. If you think you're not going to do well, you're probably not going to do well. So when you get in the boat, you get in the boat to win, and you got to have the right stuff to win.
Real repair. Real repair.
Reel repair. I get my reels cleaned. I've been through several guys to have reels cleaned, but one guy really comes to the forefront. That gentleman's Ben Tyson. Ben Tyson's quality speaks for itself. I'd like for each one of you to be able to go to Ben's shop and see the amount of quality that goes into when he takes a reel down. When he breaks a reel down, he just don't break it down to a certain degree. He's got tools that he's actually developed over the years that takes every ball bearing out and lays it on some of the most beautiful carpet or whatever you want to call it on his desk there, till it's all the way down to the hub or the inside of the reel. He actually goes to Germany to buy his oil, which is the highest grade of oil that you could put in a reel. I've had so many people come back to me after recommending him to clean the reels that I fail to keep count. His quality absolutely speaks for itself. I've had no one ever come back to me and said he did a bad job, so I highly recommend Ben Tyson. And his phone number, if you're interested, he also does rods, is 704-975-8181. The only thing he does not do is spinning reels, but all other reels and rods, he can fix them for you. I think a lot of guys know if I had to pick out one bait to go to the lake with, it would be a spinnerbait. I've been throwing spinnerbaits about all my life, ever since I was a young man and going with my grandfather to Lake Wiley. And I'm going to give you a little brief history and some of the things that I've learned over the years about spinnerbait fishing that may help you. One of the things that I look for in spinnerbaits, and I think is very important, is the shank and the size of the hook. What I'm going to do here is show you an illustration of a small shank hook coming off here, and this is actually a war eagle. But if you'll notice, the distance from the head to the curvature of the hook is extremely short. Therefore, what I like to do is find a hook. If you'll notice the difference between these two hooks, this is a number 5. If you'll notice how far it comes down, the curvature is a lot bigger, and you got a lot more bite here on this particular one. So what I look for in a spinnerbait is one that's got a big hook on the back of it, and one that's got pretty thin vibration in the wiring here. This particular spinnerbait here is one that a friend of mine, Travis Williams, makes, and that's been extremely effective in about every case that I fished on these lakes out here. The other type of spinnerbait is one that's used down at Wateree by probably the best guy that I've ever been in a boat with down there, a gentleman by the name of Pat McCoy, who designs this bait. But the key to this bait is the blade, and we call this the French blade. And basically what it is a MIPS blade, but if you'll notice the difference in the configuration of the wire, you see how that wire is straight down on the shaft here, where this particular wire here has an offset. This offset right here, when it pulsates, it throws a lot of vibration into this spinnerbait. So when conditions are tough, I like to go to an offset spinnerbait to get that extra vibration that fish will pick up. Sensitivity, the echo that this blade here seems to draw a lot more bites than say one that's got a straight shank. This particular spinnerbait here is pretty hard to find. Not so much a spinnerbait, but that blade. And we call this the teardrop. And this teardrop is a good blade when the water conditions are pretty calm. What it does, it throws two different vibrations. It throws a max coming off the tail end of the blade, and it throws a smaller vibration coming off. So what you have is a wobble coming through the water, similar to a bait fish. Very effective in calm water. I'm going to demonstrate or show you a couple of baits here that you probably can only find them on the eBay, because you can't find them hardly in the stores no more. But when you fish in grassy conditions and you got a lot of small bait fish up shallow, this is called a Shore Slayer. And this bait right here became popular back in the 60s and the 70s on Wiley and several other lakes. Very, very effective in grass. And here again, if you'll notice, I actually throw a stinger hook on the back of this because of the small shank coming off that particular bait there. But that's two different versions. It actually goes into a spin, looks like a little bait fish in behind it. Deadly little bait right there. For you smallmouth up on Lake James and you spotted bass on Norman and stuff, certain conditions based on the water clarity and the color of the water, that bait right there is really hard to beat, especially like in the shallows early spring. Chartreuse on chartreuse, very effective. If I had to pick up one bait that I really like to fish, is a double Colorado. This bait here is a very thin wire, up shallow when the fish are in the grass, you can bring that bait across the top. If you'll notice, this is a 3/8. Normally, I will throw a 1/2 ounce. A lot of times in certain conditions, when the fish are on the drops, I'll move up to a 5/8 or even a 3/4. But this right here skirts across the grass. It's got a little thin tail on the back of it. A deadly little bait. Let's talk a little bit about skirt colors and tails. Primarily, I use 4 different colors of skirts on spinnerbaits. Briefly explain to you. When you throw in a spinnerbait, I've been taught over the years that when you pull the spinnerbait all the way up to the eye of the rod and stick it over in the water, and if the spinnerbait disappears on the 3rd eye off the tip of the rod, you want to go to a darker color. I like to go to this chartreuse and white. If it disappears, let's say at the 1st eye, then what you want to do is reach over and put on a solid red. Solid red in muddy water where you would never think the fish would be has produced a lot of bites for me over the years. This particular color here is a chartreuse with a little bit of orange in it. Fish, for some reason, love orange, and of course they love red. This is very effective on Tuckertown. I've caught pretty nice stringers of fish on Tuckertown off that particular color skirt there. So basically that's the 3 or 4 colors that I normally use in different conditions. Let's talk a little bit about the tails. A lot of guys don't throw tails on the back of a spinnerbait. I like tails, and let me tell you why. In calm conditions, in windy conditions, it's very important once you understand the watercolors that you're throwing, is what type of vibration that you want coming off of the tail. When the water is very calm, you don't need a real slick tail on there. So I use different variations of a curly tail made by Fouled Albert. But one thing I always do when I'm using a white one is always dip it in chartreuse. I think that vibration coming off that tail gives me a lot more bites than say off the straight tail. Straight tails are more effective in the calm waters. Some that I started experimenting with on these lakes right here is this little deal here. It looks like obviously legs of a frog. I will actually throw that on 3 different baits. I'll throw it on chatterbaits, I'll throw it on a buzz bait, and I'll definitely throw it on a spinnerbait. When the bite's tough, a lot of times you can produce a bite off that little tail there. This particular tail here is what we call a chartreuse pepper tail. My brother and I started experimenting this back in the late 70s and 80s. This was our go-to tail in just about 90% of the conditions we throw. And I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's the black in that chartreuse that causes the bites. But if I had to pick out one tail overall, based on any conditions, it'd be that particular tail there. Very, very effective. Very small tail. But if you'll notice something about this tail, now this is bought already dipped or already dyed the red. When fish are biting short and you want to make sure they get it, I always go to this little tail right here. What they do, that looks like a bloodstream coming in behind that spinnerbait. And I've caught a lot of fish by using that particular tail right there when the bite's very, very tough. Let's get a little bit more about spinnerbaits. When you've got conditions where you're going down a bank, especially in a grassy area, you see a lot of bait fish flickering. What you want to do, this particular spinnerbait here has 7 blades to it. It looks like a small pot of bait fish. But if you'll notice here, I've attached a little swing hook by inserting it onto a swivel on the back side. And what this does, it just swings back and forth. When she comes up to get that bait fish to gulp it, that big old hook right there will normally catch her off the back side. Another spinnerbait is very effective on water reed, some of these lakes around here. Muddy conditions, you can change your little Colorado blade in different variations of color. Emmett Ray, a close friend of mine, and I blistered him pretty hard at water reed one year between this red. We had a red one, we had this orange one, and we had a chartreuse. That particular day, it really didn't make no difference, but that right there is just something different that these fish had not been seeing down there. Very effective bait. fish and the different types of jigs that I like to throw, and the reason I like to throw them. Obviously, one that's come into play here the last few years has been very effective is the swimming jig. And people ask me, it says, Bill, is that basically the same thing as the half ounce you throw and stuff? And it's quite the contrary. A swimming jig, this particular one is one that Travis Williams made, but if you'll notice the contour of the jig, the way the head's built to where it swims through the grass, and that's what you're going to be looking for on your swim jigs. Versus a jig, this is being a half ounce, being a lot broader with the width and a little bit heavier. But these are the two jigs that normally I will end up throwing. But one of the questions I also get asked a lot is about the size hook, and then very important is the little mustache, as I call them, that they put on, and how I tweak them. Do I cut them? Do I spread them? And everybody's got their own variations of doing this. But over the years, I found out that by just tweaking, and what my rule of thumb is I like to take the jig at right here at the sharpest point on the hook and grab it about like this. What I want to do is turn the jig around, grip it to where it's going to be covered, but I do want to trim a little bit of it off. So what I do is trim it at a small angle, about a 45-degree angle that you notice, but always line it back up. One of the problems you have with jig fishing is, and the reason a lot of people don't like to fish jigs, you hang it up all the time. To help eliminate, there's a couple of things you can do. Number one is take the bristles and spread them evenly, just the way I'm showing here. I spread them out, and I like to take one drop of super glue, waterproof, as I spread them out. Take one drop and put it right in the middle of that little long mustache there. And what that does, let it set, blow on it for a second or two and let it set up. What that does, obviously, causes a divide to where it protects the hook. If you notice here how the jig is protected now. The reason I do this, when you fish in brush, when on a cold, bad day, when you get buried in the brush, this jig has a tendency to turn. And when it turns, what happens, it'll turn on its side, but it hits a limb or a tree, therefore protecting the barb of the hook there. Very important. Quite the contrary to the way I think about worm fishing is, I do have a worm here today that I'd like to illustrate a little technique that I use when the conditions are really, really bad and you're losing a lot of jigs. You can take a worm, take the fat part of the worm, just cut you a little piece of the worm off. And I use this quite often when I'm getting some real heavy brush. Take the little piece of the worm, insert it into the barb as so. What that does, that obviously has a barrier when it gets into the brush pile, in the thick brush, that it keeps the barb of the hook from getting into any part of the brush now. When the bass hits it and he comes down on it, it's just like he was worm fishing. He penetrates that, it slides up, you hook the fish. Very important to do this when you get in a lot of brush and you start to lose a lot of jigs. This is something that was taught to me by an excellent jig fisherman, and it works real well. A little piece of worm, always have a piece of worm in your boat with you. Let's talk a little bit about the tails. There's a lot of different varieties of tails out there for jig fishing. You know, it really don't matter, basically what you use, but you want sometimes something that's got a little bit of a crawl aspect to it, like a twin tail crawl here that I use. But what I do here, if it's a little bit too long, I just take a pair of scissors and cut a little bit of it off like that. And what it does, it gives you a lot more meat up in here to insert that into your jig. So what I do is I always look for the eyes on whatever I'm putting on there, and always put your eyes to the outside. It's just a superstitious type thing for me. But I insert this right down in the middle of the fattest part, and I thread it on. Bring it up, thread it, bring it all the way down. Take your glue, put one drop on there, blow it, let it sit up for a minute, pull on it. That's about as good a jig that I can swim through any kind of grass or along the shoreline and stuff like that. If they're hitting it short, then you reach down, pick up your chartreuse in the spring, and this is very important. You want to tap both sides, just a little on both sides, something like that. And now, if she's hitting you short, I can just about assure you she'll get a mouthful of it when she comes back. There's something about the chartreuse on the back of any type of jig that enhances your bite twofold. That's the way I do a swim jig. Your basic jig, two colors I rely on extensively. There's a black and blue and a brown. Here I've got a jig. It's called a Big Salty. Big Salties are good for really big bites, to be honest with you. But I like to throw this a little bit more than the normal type. But I like to skip a jig. And people asked me one day, well, Bill, when you skip a jig, does it really make a difference of what side of the flat, piece of pork or you throw in, or a piece of plastic you throw in that you insert the hook into? And it does make a difference. And let me tell you why. If you'll notice here on your tail, you got a big square part that drops off here. If you insert it from the top, coming down on top of it, what this does when you're skipping a jig under a pier, it hits the water and it causes the jig not to nearly go as far as it should under the pier. It's just the centrifugal force that hits it that causes it to do that. So what I do is turn that upside down, insert it, and if you'll notice, you can't see it now, but you got little old dots in there. What you want to do to go to your third dot on your jig, insert it down in there. And what that does, now you got a complete flat surface there. So when you skip that jig under there, there's no kickback on your jig sliding under there because everything's in a smooth fashion. When the bite's tough, always carry some rattles with you. As I talked a little bit earlier about rattling, sensitivity, noise, smell, it all comes into play on a jig bite. If you can't hear this, but I'm shaking it. It's got a rattle. Sounds just like a bait fish. So conditions are tough. You're not getting a lot of bites. Insert your rattle in there. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. One way, you can actually go by a jig and take your nail, insert your nail to the inside of the hook and penetrates there. Then you take that little weight and stick it right in there. Pull your nail out, take a little weight, insert it in there. But make sure you insert it to the inside of the barb of the hook. There, look here, then there you've got a tremendous force. As a matter of fact, this has got one. I'll show it to you. I didn't realize I started pulling on it. But I've got if you'll notice here, I'm getting ready to bring it out of there. I think I've got a toothpick in this one. A little toothpick that I broke the toothpick off. I inserted it into the side of it to the inside of the hook. So when she hits it and pulls on it, she's actually pulling on the toothpick. Therefore, you can use that particular tail, quite often by that. So here we go again. I'm gonna do this one more time. The toothpick's in. We're going to insert it, but I'm going to insert it to the back side of the toothpick, like that. And now that can pull on that thing, and she can pull on it. It's not going to come off. That's a good little tip that a guy showed me one day, but it works great. Another thing I'd like to demonstrate, when you're fishing a jig, say in a tree, really has a tendency to get hung up a lot. So what you want to do is take your jig and keep a little bit of force on the line at all times. In other words, when you're pulling it up to drop it into a slot in a tree, you don't want to drop it on slack line. You want to keep some tension on your line at all times. What it does, when you pull it up off the tree limbs and stuff like that, it keeps that jig from sliding left and right. It keeps you from getting hung up on the bottom of the lake. Very important. The other tail that I use, if that particular super chunk's not working, is that this particular, if you'll notice this hook here, that's a number 5. I hadn't trimmed it up nothing. But this being a twin tail, get these over to Bass Pro Shop. I just thread these on there just like that. And when the bite's really tough and they want something that's got some vibration on it, always go to your little twin tails and you get a lot of bites off that jig right there. Here again, just make sure you peg it, very important. One of the things you need to always remember when you're matching up, if you'll notice, always match the color of your tail with the dominant part of your skirt. For example, you see how dark this blue, and I've got some black mixed in there with it. That's the dominant colors on the jig. So you always want to match your tails based on the dominant color of the skirt on the jig. You'll notice here we've done the same thing. The dominant color is a green pumpkin, so we put a green pumpkin jig tail on the back of it. Over here, we've got a little bit of a different color. We've got multicolors. We've got some blues. We've got some green. This particular tail here has been very, very effective on this particular color here. And I've used this quite often. Now, this is a clear water. One of the things you want to remember is basically the same thing in spinnerbait fishing. The darker the water, the darker the bait. The clearer the water, the clearer the bait. So, you know, you need to kind of understand the filaments of the water, how to read water, and therefore will enhance your bites. Because a lot of times it's non-productive to be throwing a clear type jig or something and staying water, because you're just not going to get the bites. It's that simple. They make a lot of different configurations of tails. Here you got a twin tail. It's got some extra little legs on it for more vibration. And then you got one here that I really like. Now this is a green pumpkin. And if you look at that, you don't see nothing really extraordinary about that. But if you look at it in the light, it's actually got purple in it. One of the things that I've learned over the years, and let me really exert this, anything that's got any sparkle in it, whether it's a star flash skirt for a spinnerbait or a jig tail, that's got any elements of flash, there's something that will attract the bass to bite it. So you want to try to get something. Your crankbaits are the same way. If you've got a crankbait that's got some type of little flash or something that attracts that fish's eyesight, which is extraordinary, you'll get a lot more bites if you got color in your baits. Okay. You can contact Travis at 704-798-8251. He's actually showed me some of his samples as far as the different skirts that he can make, and he's probably got over 200-300 different varieties of skirts. So if you can imagine what colors you would like, and he's got them, he can build them for you. One other thing I'd like to mention about Travis, he's also designed clips, little places on the back side of his hooks, to where when you thread that bait up on the back of those jigs, it automatically hooks in to where it don't come down. But he's also developed a screw type to where you can take a plastic bait and screw it onto your jig heads. Here again, ensuring that you don't lose the bait. Does an excellent job.